Chapter 10. The Gray Hats. Pete felt a little groggy the next morning. He had too much of the deceptively light wine that Sebastian had served with the excellent food. The red wine was so light and exquisite on Pete's tongue that he had gotten in a little too much. He was a student, so he would usually have beer and vodka for alcohol, that cheap stuff. Tasting that wine had made him remember all the things he associated with Tosh. Even though it was something that went against every grain in his body, he was just too tired of everything. There was no saving grace at all. Everything had gone to hell, and he was left a passenger to all that was happening. For someone who, just a few days ago, had been a planner, this was hard to swallow. As Pete sat up in his hotel bed, he groaned. His body felt sore, yet he remembered that he had called Tosh last night. As soon as the memory resurfaced in his mind, he lunged for his cell phone, and sure enough, there it was in the call log, a call to Tosh at 2 a.m. He was bewildered by his behavior. "Come on, Pete, this is not the time to be acting out," he chided himself, and then tried to remember what he and Tosh had talked about, if he had given anything away. After trying to recall the conversation unsuccessfully, he decided to call Tosh back. "Hey," Tosh said after picking up the call on the first ring. Her voice sounded cautious. "Hey, babe, are you okay? Look, did I call you this morning around—" "Yeah?" Tosh was still answering with a cautious voice, and had only spoken the two words. Pete was starting to get worried. He knew that there were only very few things that could get her mad, and he knew that she disapproved of drinking. So, without waiting for her to answer him, he said, "Babe, look, you know I don't drink. It was just important that I did yesterday. It was a survival thing." Even though Pete knew that it was a lie, he couldn't risk telling Tosh the truth, that he had to drink, because it was a social requirement in order not to give offense. If overheard by someone tapping into the call, the information was going to be a dead giveaway. Even though someone tapping the secure connection was a long shot, Pete wanted to be as careful as he could be. He did not want to get Tosh into trouble. "Okay, I know that already, by the way. I cannot believe that you were that drunk, that you cannot remember that you were apologizing all last night as well about being drunk. You said that not telling me was making you feel guilty, and that you thought it was better that I know this information right away. Then you said you loved me, and you told me to take care of myself, and that you were trying to make sure that I was well taken care of, which I did not understand at all." Pete was surprised that he had not given away anything about being with Sebastian. He was, after all, a responsible drunk. He was pleased to hear that information. "Hey, you know I love you the most in this world, and I would do anything to protect you, right? Just trust me that I will never lie to you outright. It is just that right now I cannot be very honest. Anyway, tell me, how are you feeling right now?" Pete wanted to change the subject, and he remembered that last night with Sebastian, he was troubled by the fact that lately Tosh had been feeling under the weather a lot. Pete, I have to tell you something. Babe, I wanted to be with you when I told you, but it looks like it's not going to happen for a while now." Tosh sounded as though she was almost in tears. Pete was hating the fact that he was not there to comfort her, hug her, and make sure that she was taken care of. It was his responsibility to take care of her, and the fact that fulfilling it now seemed like a far-off thing. He was just starting to feel lousy. Despite that, he tried his best to do over the phone what he was dying to do in person. He tried to comfort the love of his life. "Babe, it is okay. You can tell me anything. And trust me that I am always with you. I know it is a cheesy thing to say, but babe, you are on my mind so much. I just wish that I was with you. I'm trying my best to make that a reality. As soon as possible, my love. Pete, I'm pregnant and I'm going to have a baby. After all, we want to be together. You said that last night, that you never want to be away from me, no matter what happens. You said that you wanted us to grow old together. Babe, I want that too." Tosh said all of that in a single breath. Now that Tosh had said the main part of her secret, she wanted to hear what Pete thought about it. It was the conversation last night with him that had convinced her that she should tell him and keep the baby. Had he not called, maybe she would have listened to her father and gotten an abortion. She would have told Pete, but she was sure that it was going to be a long time before he would be with her, and she did not want to be alone. It was true that she had her father, but it was just the two of them, and that was the reason that she had decided that she was going to go ahead and keep the baby. "What?" Pete was floored. He knew that Tosh was serious. She was not in the habit of making lame jokes like these. So he did not ask her for confirmation. He was just trying to think through all the possibilities. As soon as he started to think, He realized that there were too many things that he needed to think about on this subject. He had never given it any thought. It was just one of those things that happened to other people in Pete's mind. It was not something that was going to happen to him anytime soon. Look, you don't have to say anything now. It took me a long time to get used to the idea. We will talk about everything once you have your mind wrapped around it and can think through every possibility. I am right here whenever you want to talk. Babe, I am right here as well. Just give me a bit and I will call you right back. And you are right, it is a lot to process right now. There are so many things that I have to think about. I just wish that it had happened in any other circumstance. I would have been over the moon, I assure you. Right now, my only regret is that I am not there to take care of you. I love you, babe. I have to go now, but I will call you tonight if I can. If not, I will text you. Take care and don't wait up for me. Sleep and take good care of yourself. For our baby. I will. Love you. Tosh murmured softly and hung up. Pete looked down at the phone in his hand and was surprised to realize that he had tears in his eyes. He was not sure where everything he had told Tosh had come from before hanging up, and especially the "our baby" part. But he was flabbergasted to realize that he genuinely meant what he had said. He was excited about the child. It was just the circumstances that were making him nervous about the whole thing. Pete was still thinking about his conversation as he got into the elevator to meet Sebastian at his office and finally find out what he had on his mind for him to do. The term gray hat refers to a computer hacker or computer security expert who may sometimes violate laws or typical ethical standards, but does not have the malicious intent typical of a black hat hacker. Richard had been in jail for only a few days, and he was already to the point of breaking. Even though his parents were not well and he had a few financial troubles growing up, he had never been deprived of anything in particular. He lived a sheltered life. Seeing the life the U.S. prison system had to offer, he was ready to sell anything he had. His loyalty, his morals, his scruples, everything. He just wanted to be out of the place. Richard did not have any morals to begin with. He was a person who understood money only, and that was all. All his life he had been deprived of money, after all. He was a smart individual and an extremely capable hacker, for at the end of the day, he had been one of the first persons Pete had recruited for his team. Richard was a good hacker and enjoyed what he did. He was just not at the level of Pete, yet he was better than most. As Richard was sitting in his cell, he was trying to think of some kind of information that he could tell the police that would ensure his safety from prosecution. Up until now, everything he had given them had only led them to reduce his sentence by a couple of years. Otherwise, they had not shown him any leniency for cooperation. His sister had been trying to get him out, but so far she and her boyfriend's contacts had been unable to come through. He was mad at her. She was the one who had convinced him to betray Pete. Even though Richard was about to do that himself, he would have done it on the night of the heist. Julia convinced him that it would be better if he pulled the heist by himself. It had been a lousy plan from the get-go. Richard had known that it was not something he could pull off alone, but his sister had been adamant, and she had somehow convinced him to execute it, despite his better judgment. Richard had his head buried in self-pity when a group of men dressed in plain clothes came into his cell. It was so sudden that he let out a squeak in a high-pitched voice that betrayed his fear. "Where are you taking me?" Richard asked as the men dragged him out of his cell over his protest, shoved him into a van, and handcuffed him. There were a total of 8 men. 6 of them got into the back of the van, and the remaining 2 got into the front. Richard did not know where he was being taken, but he knew that it was a weekend, and he had been informed last night that nothing could be done about anything until Monday. He also knew that prisoners were not transferred on the weekends. They had to be transported during work hours. "I need my lawyer!" Richard shouted at the 6 men who were sitting in the back of the van with him. He started getting terrified at the turn of events. It all seemed a bit like a cloak and dagger operation for him. It looked as though they were taking him out to be executed in the countryside, where no one would ever be able to find him, just like it happened in those old mafia movies. As the van moved off, the officers around Richard did not utter a single word. He was shouting, and no one was taking even the slightest notice of him. He was getting hysterical by the minute. He was also noticing that all of the men in the van carried weapons and looked very professional. They were all bulked up and looked as though they were professional wrestlers or athletes. I did nothing. It was Pete. Look, I will give you anything you want. Just please don't kill me. This is all illegal what you are doing. Please don't do this. You cannot deny me my lawyer. I have rights, you know. I'm ready to give you any information you want. Just please don't kill me. I haven't harmed anyone. The plan was made by Pete with the Chinese. I was just following along. Richard was busy babbling anything and everything that came to his mind. He would tell them anything if they would take him back to his cell. I want to go back to my cell right this very instant. I was not informed where I am being transported to. It is illegal, I tell you. Richard was shouting and begging the officers surrounding him to let him go back to the cell that he had been thinking so badly about. Now that Richard was out, he wanted back in. He wanted to escape this situation. To him, it was looking like a good plan. If these people would execute him, no one was ever going to ask any question. He was in no way a stupid person. He knew that even though his sister loved him, there was a price for which even she would stop asking questions. When this realization crossed his mind, it took his breath away. For Richard acknowledged that it was the truth. He was at this point crying and pleading with the stone-faced men, who had still not replied to him. In fact, they were behaving as though he was not speaking at all. All of them were looking out the back windows, as though the most beautiful scenery was outside. It was a little over an hour of driving when the van stopped abruptly. From the window that Richard was looking out, it looked as though they had randomly stopped in the middle of nowhere. The men who had previously been ignoring him now caught hold of him and started dragging him out. Richard felt this was the end and started screaming, "It was not me!" He started to prevent the officers from taking him out of the van. He was struggling so violently that it took the combined strength of all the 6 men in the back to get him out of the van. The 2 who had been in the front also came back to help the others. That was how ferociously he was fighting, because he thought this was the end for him. They grabbed him and dragged him into the building that had been on the opposite side from the one he was sitting. The truth was that the men only had orders to bring Richard to this building. It was a heavily secure federal building with restricted access. It had been the plan of Agent Wellington to make him sweat like this. He was sure that his sister somehow had an angle in this. They had done a bit of checking up on her, and her boyfriend was coming out to be a bit sketchy. However, they could not make a case against her, as she was a model citizen and took care of her parents as well. So there was no connection to the sister directly. Anyway, Agent Wellington wanted Richard to think that he had been saved by the opportunity that he was about to offer him. "Please leave him here," said Agent Wellington. As soon as they were seated, Agent Wellington began. "Listen, Richard, we are going to make you an offer. You are young. We've seen your profile, and you are not a bad young man. You just executed a bad idea. We reviewed the video and saw the transaction you tried to conduct. We know about your parents. They are at the mid-stage of Alzheimer's disease and are unable to support you and your sister. We have looked into your finances, and we see and acknowledge your hardships. What if we made you an offer to play on the good side and execute the right ideas? Would you be interested?" Agent Wellington got straight to the point. He wanted Richard to admit that he was not going to get a better opportunity than he was being offered. "You see, in the FBI Cyber Division, we have many challenges. Yes, we have smart agents to solve them, who are trained to think and act like hackers to deal with those challenges. However, there is a limitation to what can be thought. They are not true hackers, and it's hard for them to adapt to the mindset and think fully like hackers. To them, it is a career, a daily grind. But to you and other real hackers, it's a passion that cannot really be taught. Join our team, help us, and we will help you. Use your talent for good and not for evil," Agent Wellington said softly. His voice, although soft, was by no means weak. In fact, it was filled with resolve and determination. "We have multiple cyber cases that are unsolved because the hackers have totally eliminated their footprints. We are not sure how they are doing this. We are swamped with cases, from international cybercrime rings to digital transmission of child pornography to human trafficking with sale communicated in encrypted formats through the dark web to drug sales done via the internet. Everything has gone digital. Long gone are the days when we could easily intercept a drug trade. Everything is done via text messages, flash drives, and disposable cell phones. And because of the complexity of tracking and intercepting drug trafficking, there is a drastic increase in drug sales. We are facing the initial phase of a drug epidemic, which is already out of control. We are always figuring it out too late. We need to be in sync with what's going on. We need to be proactive rather than reactive. Can you help us? Please think about it, and your charges based on your performance will be resolved." This was music to Richard's ears because a few minutes ago, he had thought that he was going to be whacked. And now he was finding out that he was being given an opportunity to get his sentence eliminated if he only helped them. This would also mean that he was going to be able to find Pete. Richard quickly swore up and down to Agent Wellington that he was not going to disappoint him and that he was 100% in. The agent did not look surprised. When Richard told him that he would help, the agent called in Richard's new Cyber Action Team, CAT. As it turned out, the team that had picked up Richard in the van was now going to be trained by him. Richard did not waste any time to say yes to the request. He knew that he was in no position to decline this strange request, especially since it would all work out in his favor in the end. Before starting, he wanted some stuff to make his job a little bit easier. The list of items that he asked for included 3 supercomputers with glow-in-the-dark keyboards, ideal for working without any trouble during the night, even with minimal lighting, 3 large monitors, hacking software, including Kali Linux, Metasploit, and Nessus, etc., a few hacking books, most of what he remembered Pete had. "Also, you have a team of 5 to help you," said Agent Wellington. 4 of the men were the guys in the van, and another was from the office. Richard had a perspective that the new project was going to save his life, and he was definitely going to take it seriously. Richard worked diligently and put long hours on solving crimes, providing input on every case possible, and also led in resolving 2 so far. One was a released convicted criminal posing as a male teenager and trying to lure a female teenager in a hotel. And the other was a medium-sized drug bust. This was done by tracking drugs sold on the dark web and intercepting the person who was packaging them in small loads for distribution in the U.S. While Richard worked to build confidence with his team, he also taught them how to think like hackers, how to adopt a hacker's mindset, phases of hacking from reconnaissance to hacking the network stack, and how hackers erase footprints, and the final places and logs to look for during an investigation. Finally, the Cyber Action Team had something good going for them. The criminals were being caught, and the cases were being solved. Yes, he had to face a lot of trouble from his team members, who were reluctant to take orders from a hacker. But after some time, everybody understood that they needed him just as much as he needed them. How he handled the situation showed just how smart he was. After all, he was the first team member Pete had recruited. However, all of this didn't matter because the FBI needed intelligence, and they would have gotten it by force if it was necessary from Richard. 6 months later, Richard became a lead cyber special agent within the FBI, with their unlimited resources. He was authorized with surveillance access to everything and everyone, based on his job description. For obvious reasons, he used all of his newfound resources to track down his ex-teammates. But Pete, Logic, and Sosh were nowhere to be found. It seemed they had removed all their traces off the face of the earth. However, he was able to track and monitor Tosh, credit card transactions, and phone calls, and had a hunch that Pete called her frequently. But the calls were untraceable, going back to different countries. Even in hiding, Pete knew his shit. Now Richard knew through his surveillance that Tosh was pregnant. His heart filled with rage, imagining that the team was conniving behind his back all along, laughing and looking at him as a fool. He certainly felt that way when he learned about the pregnancy. His ultimate idea of catching the team started to take form. He thought if Tosh was willing to carry a baby for Pete, then Pete would surely surface to see his child. Richard had secretly accessed records of Tosh. While going through the records, one date stuck in his mind, and it was Tosh's delivery date. He was 100% sure that Pete would show up in person on her delivery date, as Pete was that kind of person. Leaning back in his chair with both arms behind his head, Richard smiled and said, "Gotcha, Pete." Please pick up the second book, Rise of the CEOs and We Are Back, from the Dark Cumulus series at your nearest bookstore or on Amazon.com.